Warning: the following fanfiction is intended for mature audiences only and not suited for minors. Viewer discretion advised. I did not write the story. I only read it. This video is for critique purposes and opinion only.
How you guys doing? I'm going to be reading you guessed it, another fanfic. There's one channel that I happen to really like. It's sci-fi. I love their TV shows. A little bit of paranormal stuff, Defiance, and that's now premiered. Totally excited about that. And they've got that whole science fiction lineup of Being Human and Lost Girl. So yeah, this one is going to be a Being Human fanfic. The US version, not the British version. To the uninitiated, it started as a UK TV show. So this one's going to have the American characters, Aiden, Josh, Sally, I guess. This is going to be completely blind. I've only skimmed through it, so I don't know too much what to expect other than it's a male-on-male slash. Yeah. So, the title is The Rush, The Thrill. And it doesn't have capital letters in the right places other than the. And it should, since the title, it should be capitalized. The R and the other T. The author is Kimi Aruto, and this is the story, what it's about. Josh and Aiden are in yet another circumstance where the vamp needs to drink the wolf's blood, but this time it has a different effect, and well, they go with it. It is rated Fiction M. It's in English, romance, friendship, and it's Aiden and Josh. Fun! It's six reviews, 28 faves, and it's 2,530 words. Not too long, but not a really short story. So here we go. Obsidian eyes stared at the outstretched arm, lines of purplish veins acting as speed bumps on the smooth, hairless forearm. Aiden could feel the pulses gushing that sweet crimson nourishment within the person before him. His darkened eyes broke their stare to look up at determined green pools, a mouth pressed into a hard line. There was no movement, only silence for Josh, but utterly torturous heartbeats for Aiden. "Well," Josh mumbled, "are you doing this or what?" He nervously shifted his weight as he spoke. Aiden noticed this all too easily. He took a sharp intake of air through his nose and closed his eyes. Pinching the bridge of his nose and furrowing his brow, Aiden slowly let out his breath through almost trembling lips. For a moment, Aiden couldn't really believe they were in this situation yet again. Josh willingly offered himself as food when times were desperate, but it was going to take a lot more than mere hunger to make Aiden forget what happened last time. He shivered at the thought of the violent convulsions, the puking, the bleeding, the tremors. It was all a very vivid memory. His mind had wanted to block out the entire situation, but there was one thing that just wouldn't let that happen. The rush. Aiden remembered how his body felt after that warm, kinda smelly wolf blood drained down his throat. It tingled his senses, made him feel alive. Oh, the sensation that threw his mind into a distant haze. Aiden felt his fingers twitch at the thought of this rush again. He opened his eyes and took a step toward the arm, only to jump back, pulling his arms across his chest in an awkward hug. Josh grew impatient and scoffed. Okay, I know last time wasn't really ideal, but you yourself said that your body adapts. You survived off of dead soldiers for half a year. Aiden made no response. He watched as Josh's expression became offended and a little disappointed, as he wanted Aiden to taste him once again. The vampire felt another hungry pang. He whimpered slightly. Josh rolled his eyes. Oh, for Christ's sake! Taking the letter opener just in his reach off of his desk, the wolf pressed the silver blade against his skin. The silver sizzled against his skin, breaking it and letting blood come spilling out. Aiden perked up once its scent was in the air and its appearance caught his black eyes. Not seconds passed before Aiden threw himself at Josh, his mouth open, bearing pearly fangs. They plunged into the wolf's skin, spraying more of the crimson treasure into his mouth. Instantly, Aiden felt the blood's effects. He swallowed in big gulps. After a few seconds, he pulled away with a gasp and a hard swallow. His breath was heavy and his eyes an even darker shade. Josh, a little winded himself, looked worriedly at his friend. "How do you feel?" he asked, beginning to pull his arm in. "What? Wait, it's just a little... Here." Aiden mumbled and desperately grabbed at Josh's arm. He planted his mouth against the wound once again, causing Josh to gasp through his teeth. Josh felt his blood climbing through his veins towards the vampire. He grew a bit weary. "Hey, it's enough, Aiden," Josh barely whispered. Aiden showed no sign that he heard Josh over his hungry groan. The more Aiden drank, the more Josh felt his heart race. Last time had not lasted this long. Last time, Aiden was on the floor convulsing at this point. Something was different this time. Josh's senses were heightened since it was the day before his change. He could slowly feel Aiden's scent growing stronger, his hormones rising as the blood triggered an aphrodisiac effect. Josh could smell Aiden 1,000,000 times more than normally. This wasn't something that Josh took lightly. He knew what vampires were like when something like this happened. Aiden? Josh tried, pulling his arm away only to get a small growl from his friend. "Let go." With a large tug, he shook his arm free from the vampire, slapping him across the cheek in the process. There was a small pause. Silence echoed throughout the house. Josh's widened eyes stared at Aiden, whose lips were stained red, his teeth no longer that admirable white. Josh watched Aiden smirk as he slid his fingers where Josh slapped him. "Speaking of the house recently, where is Sally when all this is going on?" "Whatever." "Are you all right?" Josh, being the kind-hearted man that he was, asked. "No stomach pains, no blood rushing to your eyeballs?" Aiden let out a low chuckle. Josh watched as his hands slowly made their way up to his neck and chest. Aiden's black eyes shut as he rubbed his own torso, letting out a small moan. "I feel awesome," Aiden said with another drunken giggle. He opened his black eyes again and looked straight at Josh. "You jumped a bit at this action. Your blood is so... Josh watched silently, holding his arm to put pressure on his wound. He understood how vampires were, but that didn't mean Aiden's laughter didn't send chills down his spine. It's so what? Josh asked hesitantly. Aiden threw his head back and cackled, making Josh jump once again. His wolf sensed something odd about the situation. He tried his best to hold back the growl in his throat. But before Josh had time to use any of his day-before strength, Aiden leapt towards him. He wrapped his arm around Josh's waist and pressed his hand behind Josh's head. Their lips collided with a hurtful force. Josh attempted to push his vampire friend away. Aiden, what? He tried saying as their lips barely parted, only to be rudely interrupted with another kiss. Josh felt his mind blur as Aiden's persuasive actions and abilities took a hold of his better judgment. Aiden tilted his head, pushing more into the kiss, his tongue probing at Josh's mouth. This wasn't really happening, was it? Josh figured he could be unconscious. He passed out from loss of blood, right? His whole spine shivered as Aiden's hands groped and rubbed his back, moans vibrating into the kiss. Shit, Josh closed his eyes. Despite every fiber in his body and mind being against it, the wolf gave up. A deep breath escaping through Josh's nose as he allowed his friend's tongue into his mouth. That all too familiar sensation began to flood Josh's mind. He could feel himself teetering on losing control, and yet he continued giving into the thrill. Josh wrapped his sore arm around Aiden's neck. His other arm, as if it moved on its own, went to Aiden's belt. That didn't take long, now did it? Undoing the leather belt with ease, Josh wiped it off in one pull. Aiden smiled into the kiss. Impressive, he remarked. His friend simply grunted and pushed his lips harder against Aiden's. Josh knew his wolf was going to take total control at this rate, but he was so invigorated, and he honestly didn't care at this point. The two kissed fiery for a few minutes, their hands venturing along each other's torsos. It was Aiden who pulled away, surprisingly. Maybe, he said in between breaths, this is a bad idea. Josh made no remark and simply pulled Aiden's cold body against his own boiling one. The vampire was a bit shocked at this side of Josh. They had discussed it countless times, but he had never truly experienced it. This somehow made into a conversation at one point? What, you mean this? Aiden shivered as he watched Josh lick his wound, holding the tempting blood on his stuck-out tongue. The vampire took the bait, plunging his own tongue once again into the wolf's mouth. Using Aiden's velocity against him, Josh twirled the vampire around, plopping themselves onto the bed. The kiss was suffocating and powerful. Aiden had to make sure he didn't bite Josh's tongue off out of excitation. Feeling ambitious, Josh pulled away from Aiden's hungry mouth and brought his lips to his friend's neck. Swiftly, Josh sucked at the skin, leading his way down to the collarbone. Aiden tilted his head back, exposing more kissable flesh. When Aiden felt Josh's hips buck up against his, he could no longer lay dormant. He could sense Josh's wolf's urge to dominate, but Aiden's vampiric pride would never allow that. In one rushed move, Josh now found himself below the vampire. Not able to contain it this time, Josh felt a low growl escape from his throat. His eyes widened. It never ceased to amaze him the sounds he could make. Aiden laughed as he lowered his head to Josh's torso. Not used to being the one getting fucked up, puppy. Aiden's voice husky and deep toyed. Don't worry, I've got experience. Yeah, what, 200 plus years? Josh's mouth formed to the word what, but was unable to speak once Aiden unzipped his jeans. The wolf's excitement rose as his friend straightened up, unzipping his own pants, tugging them off with no trouble. His shirt, up and over his head, tossed across the room. Josh had to keep himself from gasping as the pale, smooth-toned torso was exposed to the cool air. Josh quickly sat up, bringing his lips to the skin. He heard his dark-haired companion moan as Josh licked his stomach. His hands ventured around, grabbing Aiden's bottom, groping and squeezing it. Aiden leaned over as he guided him to lie down. Their eyes never left each other's. The vampire took Josh's hands and gently pinned them down upon the bed. This was really happening, and both of them wanted to make sure that they were both aware of it. Aiden placed his mouth near Josh's waist. He let go of Josh's wrists and moved his hands towards his thighs. He massaged them, slowly working his way up and in. Josh felt his heart beat faster with every inch Aiden moved his hands. Aiden pulled off the rest of Josh's clothes and smirked when he saw his actions had been very effective. "You're huge," he said simply. "Shut up." Josh's face flushed pink. "Don't just stare at it, do something." Without any delay, Aiden followed this request. He brought his lips up to Josh's hard member. His tongue licked and traced its shape teasingly, gliding it along the tip. Josh placed his hands over his face and whimpered, "Ah, God, of course sex with you is frustrating. Why the hell wouldn't it be?" He felt Aiden's tongue disappear. He quickly looked down at his friend. Those dark eyes stared up at him through black lashes. Aiden smirked as he placed his hands on Josh's thighs. "Don't say I didn't try to take it slow." And with that, the vampire put all of Josh's cock into his mouth. Not having a gag reflex came in handy, I suppose. "Holy shit," Josh gasped. Aiden hadn't been joking about the experience. The way his tongue moved, his mouth sucking him in, sent sensations throughout his entire body that he had never felt before. Not wanting to go too far, Aiden pulled away. Aiden leaned over and traced his fingers along Josh's lips. Piercing between the soft lips, Josh sucked on Aiden's first and middle finger. His eyes were closed and his throat hummed. Okay. It pained Aiden to watch, for he so desperately wanted his fingers to be something else. But he was a goal-oriented kind of fellow, so he tugged his fingers away. The vampire paused for but a moment, staring at his saliva-covered fingers. With just a shift of his gaze, he looked towards Josh for what seemed the 100th time. Josh, noticing the pause, lifted his head up and looked at Aiden. He lifted his hands and shook his head, non-verbally asking what the holdup was. Aiden pushed his lips into a thin line and nodded, embarrassment oddly flooding his mind. He lifted his eyebrows and held his hand up, twiddling his fingers. Josh scoffed and let his head drop back onto the bed. "Oh, for the love of... forget that. Just do it." "Just like that? You don't want me to prepare your..." Now, Aiden. The vampire took in a deep breath and tilted his head to the side. Josh lifted his legs, exposing his entrance, which Aiden quickly moved his hips towards, taking hold of himself, which was already slick with pre-cum, and pressed softly against Josh. As he took another breath in, he noticed Josh grab hold of the sheets in anticipation. Couldn't keep him waiting now, could he? Aiden pushed into Josh slowly, letting himself move deeper and deeper until his thighs pressed against Josh's cheeks. He stayed still for a moment to let Josh adjust to the feeling. He was tight but not enough that it was uncomfortable. Aiden tilted his head back, letting out a strong breath that ended in a moan. Josh felt Aiden inside him. It was hot and strong. Josh whimpered at the unusual sensation, but as soon as Aiden made his first thrust, Josh's vision went white. Hot flashes of pain mixed with pleasure shot throughout his body as thrusting eventually hit that sweet spot he didn't know existed. Aiden moved faster, feeling comfortable that his partner had no objections. With each thrust, Aiden felt his mind go blank. The uncontrollable desire took over his mind. Keep going, harder, make him submit, his inner demons urged. Aiden grunted over the wet slaps of skin on skin. The bed rocked against the wall as the rhythm grew faster. Grunts and moans escaped with each thrust from both participants. Josh's eyes were glued shut as he built up the strength to gasp out, Aiden, please, just touch it. Aiden did not hesitate in his movements, but took immediate action in Josh's request. He reached forth and grabbed Josh's hardened cock and began to stroke with his movements. Josh's moans grew louder as Aiden's skillful hand pumped up and down the slick member. Aiden reacted to this wonderful sound from Josh, moving even faster, a little more jerky than smoothly. He felt his climax quickly approaching. Grabbing the bed sheets tightly with his free hand, Aiden let out an elongated moan as his movement stopped. Josh felt the warm seeds spill inside him. Not a moment later, Josh came into Aiden's hand, his back arched. Pulling out slowly, Aiden plopped himself next to Josh on the bed. Their chests heaved and beads of sweat dotted their skin. Moments of heavy breathing passed and the boys felt their highs fall, Aiden feeling it more than Josh. His eyes faded back into their original color. The rush was long gone. How's your arm? Yeah, that's what you're worried about. What? Josh looked down at his arm, which he had completely forgotten about. How on earth did he forget? Oh, wait. Oh, yeah, I think the bleeding stopped somewhere around the blue jaw. Aiden chuckled and turned towards Josh doing the same. They stared at each other longingly, but it wasn't long before they both cracked middle schooler smiles. They bust out into laughter that wasn't going to stop any time soon. They both giggled, snorted, and gasped for quite some time. Josh rolled over and held his sides, and Aiden wiped a tear from his eye. As soon as the laughter died down, they'd look at each other and the laughs would explode once again. After a while, and close to suffocation, the two settled down. "Oh man, what the," he chuckled, forcing a smile away. "What the hell just happened?" Aiden placed his hands over his face, his shoulders quivering. "I have no idea, but that was probably the weirdest sex I've ever had. Let's not tell Sally about this, okay? Noted." So yeah, that was the rush, the thrill of Being Human fanfiction. Yeah, it's like, how does Sally not even know this is going on? She's like cemented to the house pretty much. So yeah, comment what you guys thought about the read, and if there's a story you would like to send me, go ahead. I'm not done reading any more fanfics. I'm still reading them. I'll probably do some other stuff too, like I'm trying to work on the Digimon 30-day challenge video, and just some other stuff. Alright, see you guys soon.